What's up, everybody? Thanks for tuning in to Addiction is a Scam. I'm Breaking Chains. You can call me BC, and this, every little last bit of it, is the Stigma Lounge. Joining me today, special guest, very, very smart woman, comes from kind of all over the place, currently down in South Carolina. I'll let her speak on all of those nuggets of information that she's gathered from different areas that she's been. Super blessed, super grateful to have her on the show. So I would advise y'all can do whatever you want. I'd advise taking a seat and seeing what she has to say. So, how are you, Jordana?
I am well. Thank you for having me on today.
It's absolutely a pleasure. As you know, I tell you every time we talk. Um, it's not like I think it's important to remind the guests that like I'm not paying you any money. I don't
Right.
have a million subscribers. Like you're literally doing this out of the kindness of your heart, out of your want and will to try to help make change. And I just think that that is so amazing, so awesome because I could have all sorts of ideas, but if I can't get anybody to come on board, then they don't amount to anything.
And I'm happy to do it because stigma and is a systemic barrier in addiction treatment. So honestly, anything that I can do to help reduce the stigma and to help educate people a little bit more about what is substance use disorder and how did we get where we are, and more importantly, how do we get out of where we are?
Yeah, for real. And like growing up, so like I graduated in a town of about, well, I don't know what the town numbers are, but I can do this. I think we started with like 113 kids in our class, maybe graduated 85 to 95, somewhere in there. So very small area. Everyone knows everybody. So once you kind of delve into that path of sometimes no return, unfortunately, it's common talk, and that's just you're labeled that, and there's no getting out of it. And even if you go and you stack up years and years of clean time, especially if you do it using like medication, whether methadone, buprenorphine, something like that, they
Mm-hmm.
view it as a crutch. They don't think you're really clean. So like that's kind of where the origins of my like annoying being so annoyed with this, just so many stigmas that surround the
Mm-hmm.
topic comes from. But yeah, we'll start with the biggest one. The biggest one that I think is the biggest one, and kind of
Sure.
the staple of the show. We always
Yeah.
The first one is do you yourself think addiction is a disease?
So I think that I would be remiss in not answering this question with some historical information. So addiction was not even really looked at in the medical community. In fact, it was two lay people, and this is where AA comes up in the 1930s that looked at alcohol, right? And they looked at alcohol as a problem, and they viewed it as a spiritual sickness. And created a program that I think most people have heard of, Alcoholics Anonymous, right? And they made the 12 steps from a Judeo Christian kind of viewpoint. Some people still find great success using AA, not a clinical treatment. It wasn't until 1956 that the American Medical Association actually accepted alcohol use disorder as a diagnosis. And again, that's just alcohol, right? That's nothing, not talking about anything else. Substance use disorder was not even a discussion until the 1980s, right? And that was when they developed when physicians that studied addiction, and there were developments in neuroscience that allowed us to see in the late 20th century that there were neurological changes in the brain for people who were exposed to mind and mood altering substances, right? So these were real brain changes. And when people are in active addiction, their pleasure reward center is quite literally hijacked, right? So our basic needs, our basic human drives, right? We have the drive for food, shelter, to procreate, and to stay high, right? If that's where we're at with that. So to answer your question, do I think it's a disease? It fits the biopsychosocial disease model, much like type 2 diabetes, right? However, when we take the bio out of it, the biology out of it, we're left with the psychosocial part. And when we look at psychosocial diseases in general, right, I tend to look at them more as adaptation. And I seldom find a client of mine that did not have one of the following: either adverse childhood experiences, a situation where there was, an abuse situation, sexual assault, some type of trauma history. And I think it's important to note, though, when there's the tendency to vilify people who have a substance use disorder, right? And I think we can thank Ronald Reagan and his war on drugs for that, and maybe before that Richard Nixon, but I don't want to go before my time and speak out of school
Yeah.
because I don't know much about that. But the war on drugs is a war on people. It's still a war on people, and it's still a stigma on people who are sick. So are they sick? Can they control their behavior? Do they have a disease? It really depends. But what I have seen is that when we look at children, right? When children are in a home that is abusive or neglectful, they can't leave, right? And oftentimes, even if they report it, then they're taken to a situation that may or may not be better. But I mean, my point being is the only choice they have is dissociation, right? Where they can find connection with something. And what is that something most commonly? Well, that something most commonly is drugs and alcohol. And increasingly now it's technology and the internet and gaming. For younger folks too. So we would be remiss if we did not address the behavioral addictions when we address the substance addictions, because they are the same when you look at the brain and the pleasure reward center. So I know that's a long way around the question. So I guess to answer the question more directly, I think substance use disorder is more of an adaptation than it is a disease specifically, although it does fit the biopsychosocial disease model. And we also need it to be one in order to bill for services. So
Yeah.
there's that bit,
Yeah.
at least in the United States healthcare system.
Yes.
But that's a whole separate podcast, navigating the U.S. healthcare system.
Yeah. No, it's one of the rare areas where politicking is beneficial. So when I started my journey into, I guess, sobriety, you would say, when I walked away from opiates in 2014, I
Awesome.
got my bupes from the street till my daughter was born in February, and I was like, I just couldn't consciously do that anymore. So and then it was still really hard to find a doctor, like, without going to like an intensive outpatient. Um,
Sure.
it was hard, but so anyways, where I'm going with that is fully 10 toes planted. No way, no how. It's not a disease. And I would break it down and kind of justified it in my head as the lady or gentleman across the street who has cancer, they have a disease. But my me in 2012, that I had a choice. However, after launching this podcast and getting to meet people like yourself, I've since went from there to absolutely on the fence of it because there is so many valid points. There's very technical points like you're talking about with the definitions and things like that. And I always have maintained that I feel like substance abuse and mental health go hand in hand. So that mental health is absolutely, whether it's, some people would call it a disease or not, it's absolutely a disorder at the very least. And then that's not even getting into the behavioral trends and just the compulsiveness. And, because it can be with anything. Like somebody could get clean and then just overeat all day, every day.
And that's cross addiction. And cross addictions are actually quite common, especially in early recovery. People put down whatever their drug of choice was or alcohol, and then they engage in other obsessive compulsive behaviors. So if you look at the diagnosis, it does have a lot of overlap with obsessive compulsive disorder. In the obsessive compulsive thought patterns that go with using. So a lot of times people do transfer, they'll put down the alcohol and then they compulsively engage in sexual relationships,
Yep.
or they game compulsively, right? And they treat that behavior the same way that they would the substance, right? They find themselves thinking about it all day, and then as soon as they're done with work or whatever, they race and their lives are consumed with that behavior as well.
Um, Another thing that's crazy too is you touched on the AA stuff, and I keep the big book over here, but I've never once stepped into an Alcohol Anonymous. I've never once stepped into an NA. Um, I did one inpatient and I did two outpatients, all of which were court ordered. The second outpatient was court ordered to inpatient, and then whatever they suggested after. So that was kind of one and the same. Um,
Sure.
but yeah, never went to any of the meetings or any of that stuff, or um, did the
So
sponsor
they
stuff.
never made you go to meetings as part of your sentence then?
Well, yes, you're supposed to, but
Yeah.
there's kind of
That's I thought that, yeah.
you're supposed to, yes, and I don't. All right, so let me preface it with this. Kids, you are my biggest focal point with this podcast. Is the target market is society, but my passion, my heart is in saving you all and hoping that you can get the message of just let us be the ones that did things the hard ways.
Yeah.
So what I'm about to say right now, like, please do not ever put this like thought process to work. This is I'm so lucky to be alive. I also didn't have to worry about carrying around test kits with fentanyl being
Yeah.
in God knows what. But
Yeah.
what I learned rather quickly with Alcohol Anonymous and Narcotics Anonymous is that like they can't actually check on that. Like they can't like are you definitely doing that or not? Like they have to take
So they
your
never made you get your sheet signed?
right, like whatever it was with yes, exactly. I never had to what they always told me at that facility in um Glens Falls was that, and one of the dudes, Curtis, he was recovering alcoholic. He was like one of the only ones that I was ever able to relate to because he was one of the only ones that had actually been through. The rest of them I kind of referred to as like test takers. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and again, that is not taking anything, just like it's not taking anything away from AA. It's not taking anything away from those people either, because I applaud them for dedicating their lives to wanting to try to help this cause. And like,
Mhm.
they could have done so many other things, and they just they chose to go the route of trying to help others. So it's not a knock on them, but
Sure.
it just didn't fit with me. I'm sitting
Yeah.
there and I got these people that have no clue. Like, they don't even have a clue, like, how to get me to talk about the stuff that I need to talk about to even get a baseline to figure out what's
Mhm.
wrong. Like, they would have the bare minimum of, like, father was incarcerated for murder at this age, whatever, little things like that. But they didn't really have the tools, I guess, to work with. Maybe, I don't know what it was. I also was very quiet. Um, didn't really, still struggle with this. It's gotten a lot better,
Yeah.
but didn't trust people very much. So it was not easy to open up to these people.
Sure.
Absolutely 110% suffered severely different PTSDs, but like PTSD from police officers and things like that.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, and you and I have talked about this before, it's like when you're court mandated to some of these facilities, like, they're kind of, I don't want to say in bed with them, but they sort of are. Like,
Yeah.
they're the same, they may golf together or whatever. So, like, even though it's not a police officer, it's the same crew, yeah, so to speak.
Well, it's
So
a state, right? So when you end up in the crosshairs of the legal system, the charge is literally, like you're in the state of New York versus
right, right,
versus BC over there, right? So the
yeah,
whole state of New York against you. And then what happens, for pre-sentencing report, they send you to somebody who works for who? The
right,
state of New York,
right,
right? And then they typically refer you to services provided by who?
yeah,
Again, the state of New York, right?
yeah,
So for a lot of people, I think they struggle with finding, finding themselves comfortable enough to actually make the most of a mandated treatment. And then, we also need to ask ourselves, right? I mean, is mandating treatment the most appropriate thing to do? Um, do we mandate mental health treatment when somebody commits a crime in a manic episode, for example? I mean, I don't know because I don't work in every jurisdiction, but I can tell you that I see far less frequently court ordered mandated mental health services than I do court ordered. I mean, I work, I do IOP for the Department of Corrections. So I do come across a lot of people who are voluntold that, this is their choice, or they can be incarcerated for X number of days, right? So, I mean, of course, it's sort of boot on the neck kind of being voluntold that you're going to treatment. So, do people come in an action stage of change typically when the court sentences them? No, they don't at all. And the younger they are, the more often they will sit in front of me with their arms folded and say, I don't have to talk to you. And they
yeah.
absolutely do not have to talk to me.
No,
But most of the time, they find that I'm actually willing to talk, quite willing to talk about anything. It doesn't have to be that. And, it ends up being fruitful regardless. Um, but do I think, I mean, and you didn't ask me this, so I'm going to volunteer my opinion on this
yeah, you're
because I
good.
have a strong one. Do I think the criminal justice system belongs inserting themselves in substance use disorder treatment? And the answer to that is no. I also firmly don't believe that we cage sick people. I think that that's inhumane. Um, And if we look at the Department of Corrections, there is a large percentage of people that are incarcerated right now that not only have a substance use disorder, but have severe mental health problems that are getting minimal interventions while they're in a rehabilitation facility. And it's not rehabilitation. It's caging people. It's a war on people. And I think we really need to revamp this whole system, because I know that you get the argument from people, well, they knew what they were doing when they did it. Okay. And let's concede that that's accurate, right? And let's concede that they owe a debt to society. Can't that debt be paid while they're on tether outpatient? Because when we take parents away from their children, and people away from their partner, and anyone away from their support system, I mean, there's literally a whole section of treatment plans when I work with people that's called support systems, right?
Yeah.
And we're taking people away from the only support systems that they have. So one, we're setting them up for failure. Two, we're causing generational trauma by removing disproportionately men of color, actually, from their household and from their children.
Yeah, it is. It's so messed up too because I was telling this. I'm on probation because of a driving without a license thing, but I was talking to a probation officer about getting his. So when you're on probation, you're not supposed to talk with other criminal, people, blah blah blah. So I had to ask for permission to. I didn't. He said you don't. That's different. He said what you're trying to do is different. I think it's awesome. Blah blah
Mm.
blah. And we got into the conversation of not understanding, like how he doesn't understand, uh, he doesn't understand that how people can blah 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 blah. And I think the best way, and this is what I tried to explain to him, was when we're in those states of minds where we are addicted to a substance, whatever it is. The First of all, rational, logical thinking is not. That's not there. Critical thinking, that's not at the top. We actually don't even love and respect ourselves at that time, let
No.
alone anybody else, let alone our loved ones, let alone authority, which we may already have preconceived notions about. And the reality is, it kind of pisses us off when, like, even just our loved ones are saying that they're worried and da 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 da
Yeah.
da. Because more so than ever, when you're in those addicted states of mind, that's when you feel like you haven't figured out the most. Like you're just
Yeah.
you're convinced that you got it, and it touches on exactly what you're saying. With we're not, like, you can push pause on it, when you put them in those facilities and things like that, but you're not fixing anything. You're just
No, it's a band-aid on a bullet wound unless you're actually getting to what, I mean, the addiction is somebody's best solution to solve a problem. So the real question is, what is the problem and why are you in pain?
right.
What hurts? Like
Right.
anytime you go to the doctor, any doctor says, what is ailing you? What hurts, right?
Right.
And at the end of the day, addiction treatment is no different. It's not about the substance. It's about what hurts and why can you not bear to be mindfully present in your life? What's going on in your life that you can't exist there, without dissociating at least a little bit from it. And that's really the more important question, I think, to be asked when asked about addiction treatment. It's not why are you doing this. It's what are you trying to treat on your own that you're not getting help for.
Yeah. So from the first time we spoke, um, you talked about that stuff, and I've paraphrased since, but told probably, I would say, 85 to 90% of the people that I've spoke with about coming on the show, about and why I brought to you that I wanted to air your episode first as the first guest, because I do think it's not only brilliant, but it's so spot on to, like, the way I was paraphrasing it is like she works from the inside out. She like sits you down. If it's not fentanyl or heroin, something's gonna kill you tomorrow potentially. She's okay with letting that subside for a minute because she wants to get to know you. What is it? Is it childhood trauma? Is it, like, whatever the case may be, what is causing this issue? um and that's probably what I think is the most beautiful thing that you, in the way you go about the way you practice, so to speak, in this field, um which leads me, because I definitely want to bring up and ask you if you don't mind sharing with our viewers about when you first got started and were in northern Michigan, and you went to, I forget if it was a hospital or a rehab, and
I was working in a hospital in a short-term residential facility. So it was, your typical 30-day short-term residential type facility. I also worked in outpatient partial hospitalization after I'd been there a couple of years, and I've got my board certification. I did do that too, and that's a day program, and that's more for the dual diagnosed, so that's a little bit different. So some of the materials I would use are different, but I absolutely got my start in short-term residential, which some people say is trial by fire, but I have to say I quite enjoyed it. And I learned, I was a grad student at the time, and I learned as much from the patients, I think, as they learned from me. And I think the patients actually helped mold the way that I provide care now, more than any textbook. And of course, we can't discount the importance of clinical research, because that's important.
of course.
And it is important, and it plays an important role in care delivery, especially if you are delivering care from a certain treatment modality lens, right? But I learned so much from asking the patients questions, and I learned more from doing that, I think, than anything else.
Yeah, no, I know, and I my favorite story that you told me was the when the one gentleman told you could take your white and and go figure out what the problem is, um because you learned, you actually did end up going and sort of taking his demand as advice, and sat down and learned some things about that culture in its own that you still kind of utilize in your practice, right? You would just, like,
And
the abundance of
and
things.
our indigenous people have their own book. It's called The Red Road to Wellbriety, if you didn't already know about that. So do not make the mistake, if you're a new clinician, of handing a native person a big book and just assuming that that's going to be okay with them. The
Um,
Red Road to Wellbriety is an amazing source, and it is not oppositional to what's in the big book. It just is, it's more about staying in balance with Great Spirit than it is from that Judeo-Christian, viewpoint, that AA was created by. And again, not knocking any peer support. There are
right.
tons of them. There's Dharma, there's Smart, they're all different. They're all peer support, and that's, and peer support's a great thing, especially because a lot of people that you'll find with a substance use disorder have either alienated all of their support systems, or maybe they don't have any, because quite a few of, at least my DOC folks, are products of the foster care system.
Or we've
So
burned the bridges.
yeah. So yeah, there's people who legitimately have burned bridges, but with some of them, there's always that hope of reconciliation, or there's something that, that maybe can be done. They call it an amends in 12 steps, but sometimes we can rebuild some of those relationships depending upon how damaged they are.
Yeah.
But there are people out there, believe it or not, who don't have a soul in their life that, you know, that they can rely on. And quite a few of those people are just aged out of the foster care system. And that's another sort of systemic problem we have, because we give 18-year-olds a garbage bag and we send them on their way and we say goodbye. And, you know, where are they supposed to go? And I don't think a lot of states have a plan for where they're supposed to go. And, you know, so, you know, then that becomes, they fall into the welcoming arms of the substance use disorder active addiction community.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a big part of what I'm hoping to do here is the answer to that question would be here, you know. Hopefully someday, I told you a little bit about it, but we get to and I've talked about it in previous episodes of my own individual ones. We as in A.I.A.s, excuse me, have to edit that one. Can get to a point of having what I call practical sober living houses and proper
Yeah.
rehabilitation centers, because you know, if we can build some trust through this platform and stuff like that, uh, it'd be great to go to my grave knowing I left the world a better place than what I found it, and it'd be even more honoring to know that the evolution that you've touched on in different things, I think is going to continue to evolve in all of substance abuse and the way it's approached and treated and everything. I think some things will phase out, and I think new things will phase in. And I, you know, would love to work across the country and find safe places for those, because another big issue and contributor to that is the prescribing of substances like Adderall to children under 10, sometimes under 8 years old. And that's such a disaster. I know you really don't like that, so you don't have to speak on that one if you don't want to.
It's not that I don't like it. What I guess my biggest issue is pediatricians don't have a whole lot of substance use disorder specific education. They just don't. It's not in their program, unless, you know, pediatrics has changed over the years. Very quick to pull out a prescription pad for things that are, with all due respect, either methamphetamine in the case of like Focalin, or one molecule away from methamphetamine. And these are to people, to children who do not have a fully formed prefrontal cortex. And that's my biggest concern with any daily medication, for anyone really under the age of 21, would be because of, you know, what is the impact to their prefrontal cortex, and are we making the ADD better, or are we preventing the development of that prefrontal cortex and exacerbating it? And then in most places, when people turn 18, you'll see big signs in primary care that says no new ADHD patients, right? Meaning that they have huge barriers, because for some reason providers seem to think that the diagnosis just goes away when you turn 18, and that's not the reality. So I think we definitely need to, the medical community, because I'm not a prescriber, needs to really think about what's the long-term game plan. And are there behavioral interventions? And that would be a bigger question for the schools, you know, because do we want these children just compliant so they sit in their desk all day, or do we want to actually create a space for neurodivergent children where they can learn the way they were supposed to learn? Because really, who says that the way we teach children lined up in desks, having to sit there and look at a board all day, is really the ideal way to work with a child? And I don't work with young children. I certainly don't work in education, so I don't want to speak outside of scope with regards to that. But in terms of my practice, I do ADHD and AUDHD coaching, mostly for college children. I call them children, but I guess they're between 18 and 21. And a lot of them do find that the behavioral change takes more time, but they prefer it because they're not constantly worried about shortages and if I don't get my medication and what if this happens and what if that happens, and then they actually have like tools to change their behavior. Now, I'm not completely anti medication. My thought process on that is it shouldn't necessarily be the first thing that is done, and I certainly
Right.
don't think it's something that should be done before the age of like 10. I mean, these are little children,
Yeah.
and the thought of feeding them something that's just so very close to methamphetamine is I find a little problematic as a substance use disorder clinician.
Yeah. My qualm, so to speak, with it is a doctor that I was seeing at a behavioral health clinic explained to me one time how easily it is to confuse literally something as simple, not simple, but as simple as depression with ADHD. So if you're if you're just kind of putting your child in front of one prescriber for 10 minutes and the assumption is, yep,
10, you're lucky to get 10
right,
depending on your
yeah.
insurance.
Right, for real, right. And then that's the assumption basically. That's my worry because then you're talking you and I have talked about it before, hypothetically, let's just say they get 7 out of 10 of those diagnoses right. Well, now 30% of those
Right.
children are being given stimulants that their brains don't need. And now you're talking tolerance. Now you're talking just trying to get serotonin levels back at a older age and not even having a grasp on what the heck is going on, and it's just a recipe for disaster. Then the other layer of now again with the fentanyl, so all right, well that stuff they were prescribing me is like the same thing as that methamphetamine, so I might as well just get some of that over there, and that's like Russian roulette nowadays.
It is absolutely like Russian roulette. And I think, I mean, sadly, when we look at, how do people get a chemical dependency, one of the ways that people do get a chemical dependency is consistent exposure to these rewarding chemicals, right? And we can't deny that daily exposure to an amphetamine does have the possibility of creating a dependence. And I'm just not sure that, I can't speak for every pediatrician, but I'm just not sure that the pediatricians are sitting down with parents and having this very real conversation that, this may cause a lifelong, stimulant use disorder in your child. Do you still want to proceed? And I find that really interesting because, if you get like a wisdom tooth pulled and you get maybe like 7 Vicodin, you have to sign like 20 sheets of paper acknowledging that you understand that you may develop an opioid use disorder from, the 12 pills that they're going to give you. So I always am kind of bewildered at why the medical community chooses to vilify certain controlled substances, but then other controlled substances are kind of fine to be doled out like candy to very small children.
That is, I've wrapped my head around that 1,000 times too, and I've even seen just locally, parents of stature, engineers, attorneys, like
Hmm?
have kids my age. And again, I don't know how many doctors, whatever they've sat down with, but I know they've sat down with at least one and accepted a prescription for a
Hmm.
controlled substance for a child at 7 years old. And that is when you're talking about attorneys and engineers by society standards, those are some of the upper echelon people in intelligence and stuff. And I would like to think that okay, they probably got that one right, but you don't really know. And yeah, but if we're at the point we're at now, because if it was when I was a kid and I
Mhm.
went in there it was like a broken wrist, well, then you get all these pain pills. Let us know if you need another 90. And,
Right.
and it's
Eh,
not
eh,
like
eh,
that now.
Yeah, so pain being the fifth vital sign, right? So we're always checking for pain. So the 80s and 90s told us to constantly be monitoring our pain. Now we're told to kind of gaslight ourselves into believing we're not actually in pain.
Right.
Like, are you in pain? No, you're not. You're fine. You're not in pain. But it's just interesting, I guess how there's a stigma even around prescriptions. So no stigma around giving small children, amphetamines, but huge stigma around prescribing opioid pain medication for like more than 2 days or 3 days. So now we have a situation with the opioid crisis where unfortunately we have patients that are post-operative writhing in pain. I have a friend who had to have an emergency C-section not that long ago, and no pain pills for you because you might develop an addiction. Well, yeah, but she was in immense pain, which made the whole birth experience traumatic for her.
Yeah.
So really, I don't know. I mean, that's outside of scope for me. But I think as a society, we really kind of need to, at least the medical community and the mental health and substance use community needs to have a more open, back and forth dialogue about controlled substances. How and when are they used? In what ways, is it causing a problem? In what way do you see a problem? And I don't see enough of an open dialogue from the medical community to the mental health substance abuse community. It's getting better, but it seems that at least substance, as a substance addiction therapist, we're sort of on an island unto ourselves. And in some states, I've made really great relationships with physicians, and that's been wonderful. One of the really good things I think that's happened in recent years is the Suboxone waiver has been lifted, so people can get Suboxone discreetly from their primary care physician, and there's no longer the mandate that you have to go to treatment with it. So it is, it's a prescription that people can get, and they don't have to submit to treatment. And years ago, at least back in even in 2018, 2019, I was seeing places hold those prescriptions over people's head and make them see someone. And it never kind of made sense to me, why do you have to see someone to get medication to help you get off of opioids? That never really resonated with me, and it never seemed equitable because other patients were not made to do that.
Yeah, it's funny because that's what I just highlighted to ask you about is what where the how much of a change you feel like you've seen in that progress wise. Because I personally, being someone who was prescribed that and on it and had to go to see doctors to get it, to then um what helped me was, well, I say helped me, but COVID is what kind of opened the door and then the trust I had built the 4 years prior to that with my prescriber, but to at
Yeah.
least being able to do telehealth and things like that. But yeah, I I think it's gotten better in the medical field, but I still think it's a very very real stigma amongst
It
society,
is.
and that's the crappy part about the whole thing for me.
And that's
Because
such a hard, it's a systemic barrier for people to get back to society, because society looks and says, well, why can't you just get this under control and be a productive member of society, right? Well, I don't know, maybe because you've saddled this person with a felony, so they
Right.
can't find work, they can't find housing, so there's that. And what happens when people typically cope using substances? Well, when they can't evolve, then what happens is typically they go back to where they felt most comfortable and most accepted, and that was in circles of active addiction, because every door is being slammed in their face. No, you can't work here. No, you can't live here. No, you can't stay here. No, you can't see your children unsupervised. All because of something like simple possession. And I'm not trying to minimize that people in active addiction do commit other crimes, and they should absolutely be held accountable for those. My point, though, is with other crimes, time done typically means time done, right? Unless you're saddled with a felony, and then it doesn't mean time done. It means, yes, you've completed your sentence, but your long road to recovery has only just begun. And here's a whole bunch of systemic barriers that society is going to throw at you, because you're a person with masterful coping skills to begin with, right?
Yeah.
So go ahead and manage this.
Yeah.
So that really is dichotomous for me, to see society wanting, or at least claiming that they want, the population I work with to get back on their feet and get back into society and re-engage. If that's really what you want, then why the systemic barriers? Why doesn't time done mean done?
Right.
And I guess that would be more of a question to our lawmakers and people who are in charge of the criminal justice system. But I don't know if they're aware of these barriers, or they're not aware of these barriers. But to just expect to pop the gate when somebody's done, I have clients who have done a decade or more inside, and to think that you can just pop the gate and, give them an EBT card so they can have something to eat, and they're just going to walk right back into society and assimilate perfectly. I don't know if that's willful ignorance, a lack of, society wanting to invest in these bridge services. And it certainly does vary state by state. I don't want to, some
Yeah.
states are
Yeah.
much better than
Some are.
others.
Yeah.
But I have always had a real problem, with these barriers, these huge barriers that we're putting up for people to overcome. And historically, these are not people who have a great bandwidth of coping skills to begin with. So several of these, like, no, you're a felon, get lost, might make them just say, what, I guess I'm destined to be, an addict, and, go back there, because that's where they feel welcome. And that, the rooms of AA and NA, right? So that would be a really great place for those, right? Because when people feel that rejection and stuff, where can you go to find, to find people who understand that? And so that's where I would say those peer recovery places have great value.
You can come right here. That's where they can go.
Yeah.
Two things I want to touch on. First one. So yes, I firsthand know he got 96. He went in September of 21. He came home. The person, I word it this way because just it's no knock on him, but
Sure.
the person I've always been told is my father. 25 years in New York State prison system, and then I didn't see him for like a year after he got out. My grandfather was very stubborn, like he's not coming here, he's not staying here. If that was my daughter he killed, I would not want him to get out of prison. So he actually, believe it or Northern Michigan is where he
Ended up.
relatives up there. But and then my like if there's I'll guess I'll say five, but really probably three people in this world that I truly, truly, truly trust and know that they have as much respect for me as I have for them and would do the same for me that I would do for them. One of them is currently doing 17 years right now for possession. Now, I'm not trying to undermine it was the largest drug bust in the county's history, but no sales. Like they didn't
Yeah.
even know he was selling drugs. And the only reason he was selling the drugs is to support his habit. He just happened to hit it just right at a time where the town was full of um, drug addicts, and the drugs that he was getting were like the creme de la creme, like it was real. Again, kids, like it was a different world before this fentanyl.
Yeah. Sure.
He was getting real heroin. But yeah, he got hit simple. I say simple, but because there's no sales or anything, and 17
Yeah.
years, and he's fighting now because he's hit the 10-year mark just to get work release, and like that's a
Yeah.
whole battle in itself, because of how far upstate New York he comes from and where the prisons are and like the travel in, and then down there where he doesn't know anybody, he's a convicted felon. So nobody wants to trust this stranger who's just done 10 years in prison to come work for him on the weekends
Yeah.
and blah, blah, blah. But the other thing is I want to touch on is to remind people that I'm going to have to pull the notes right out for this one. When they are going through their legal troubles, they need to know that it's important that they do not. All states are different, but most states this would apply to. They do not have to go to the facility or go get the evaluation from the place that the judge or the prosecutor suggests. They can come to someone like you and get that same evaluation for the court. And I
Correct.
think that is at least when I was growing up, that was a big misconception by a lot of parents whose kids were in trouble. It was like, they were like, no, the judge, the district attorney, they said da 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 da. And it's like, yeah, no.
So it'll
Right.
usually say, in the court order papers, there, I mean, typically in most states, there's what's called a pre-sentencing report.
Yep.
Now, you must go to the office of parole or probation. I guess it would be probation before
Yeah.
conviction.
Yeah.
So whomever the probation officer, you don't have a choice with that. You have to
Right.
go to
That
probation.
that you have to
Okay.
do. Yeah.
But when they include must have like an ASAM assessment or a level of care assessment, right? They usually tell you, well, go to, this government building here. And what a lot of people don't know is, no, this ASAM assessment can be done by any board
Right.
certified licensed clinician. And you can absolutely hire your own. And what's unfortunate is people of means, they know that.
Right.
They know they don't have to accept that. And a lot of times though, people can't afford a private assessment, right? Because typically the state will provide one for you free of charge, right?
Right.
So a lot of people may not be able to afford a private assessment, right? But that's why I always provide sliding scale services and definitely affordable assessments for people, because I don't think that they should have to, sort of, once you're in the system, it's like, it's very hard to get out of the system. It's almost like a spider web
Yeah.
for a lot of people, and it's difficult to navigate.
Yeah. No, it is. And then like, especially again, getting back to rural areas, it's like, I speak often about the clouds of delusion over society, and people think I'm crazy and whatever, and that I'm the delusional one for that. And like an example is like, so this is how I would look at it. In small areas, district attorneys, police officers, all those people, if there's not much crime, they should be proud of that. They should be
Yeah.
proud to go to those state meetings and like our county has yada yada yada. They shouldn't be worrying about getting whacked for not having enough
Quotas.
right. Like, but whether that's what it is or whether sometimes it's power tripping, whatever the case may be, I know personally myself was a victim of like it was like a village police force, which some of them were decent, but there was a couple that it was just like radar on a handful of us, and like every
Sure.
move, every little last thing you did, and like it's so sad to think about because like what's the win? Your paycheck's not changing. Like if you're trying to get promotions, it's not going to come from arresting 15, 16, 17 year olds for possession of marijuana or disorderly
Mhm.
conduct or, things like that. It's going to come because another peer of yours can see that like you're an intelligent being, like that you have a desire, strive. Like it's so backwards in my mind that we live in a world that is like that. It gets back
Well,
to the
I think
war.
it would be remiss to discount that the this the district makes a significant amount of money off of people that they keep in the system. You pay to be on probation. If you are lucky enough to get on tether or ankle monitoring, you pay for that. Um, I know at least in Michigan, it was almost $1,000 a month for the breathalyzer they would install in your car, and you pay monthly to be on probation. You pay for the urinalysis that they make you take. You pay for the classes they make you take. So this is all a lot of money, and so I guess the question that I would have is where's the money going? And that is a revenue source for the county, and more rural counties probably need more money because New York City, I'm sure, does a large volume of business.
Yeah.
When they're arresting people, they probably arrest people in 6 hours, the same number of people that would be arrested in a very rural area in 6 days,
Yeah.
right? So they have the money coming in, which means they don't have to overcharge smaller cases. Whereas in some districts, they'll overcharge. And there's a saying that says a good lawyer knows the law, a great lawyer knows the judge.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, no,
and I think that's definitely true in
that's
in
definitely
smaller
true.
communities,
I got like
right?
that is definitely true, and I don't think he'll have a problem with me saying this right now. If I did not have the relationship I have with William Montgomery III, I absolutely would have been sent away a long time ago for a long time. Um, he's
And then let's think about that though, because let's think about if you were sent away for a long time for your substance use disorder, what impact would that have on your daughter?
yeah, well, so as a well, exactly, I will say that. Fortunately, she wasn't born until 16. Um, Actually, we should touch on that because that's part of the reason why I feel like addiction's a scam. Um, so people ask me why. I'll answer the question first. If she had been born and I went away for a long time, it would be so detrimental. If something happened to me right now, it would be so detrimental to her because like
Yeah.
I'm her entire life. And then it's not even just that. She'd have to change schools. She'd have to, so like just so much. When she was born, like whatever happened during the birth, like I was just like kind of sitting there, and this nurse comes over with her and she's like, "Take your shirt off, take your shirt off." And I'm like clueless to
Yeah.
any of this. I never even wanted to have kids, and I'm like, "Huh?" So I take my shirt off, but I had like one of those beaters on underneath it.
Mhm.
And she's like, "No," and she she grabs that beater and she pulls it up and she stuffs my naked daughter
Yeah.
underneath and pulls the beater back down and throws a blanket over us, and then she explains we have to take her mother. We got there at like 5:30 something, and she was literally out and in our hands at 6:01. Like,
Oh, wow.
yeah, the
That's
is
quick.
yes, yeah. So because it was so quick, she had to go have some tests done, and so she couldn't um do the skin to skin. I didn't know about skin
Yeah.
to skin. That's what was going
Yeah.
on there. So the bonding actually got done with me, which is crazy in its own thing to think about. But yeah, no, real quick funny story about that is um her mother's suffered, anxiety, stuff like that. Prescriptions for it, and I was pretty like uh I don't want to say controlling, but I definitely kept an eye on what medications were taken when my daughter was in her belly, what foods were
Sure.
eaten when my daughter was in her belly, and like, and to her mother's credit, like sometimes she didn't love it, but she did it. Like
Yeah.
she didn't drink, she stopped taking her anxiety medication. Like she would eat up, like even if it might be, maybe flounder or something like that. Flounder she liked, but a good food like that, even if she didn't like it, she'd still like get enough of it down for it to get to the
Yeah.
baby and stuff. So can't say enough bad about that. But anyways, we get there, and so they got her up, and they said, "Do you want the?" And there's two types of pain, whatever you can get, like the
Yeah.
epidural and then something else. And she's like, "Can I have both?" And and I go, "She doesn't need any of those." I was like, we made it this far. We made it this far, Samantha. You don't need any. Jayla doesn't need any of that stuff in her. And the nurse turns around and joking. She's like, "You're not the one doing this."
Yeah.
And she says, "I'll go get the epidural," or the midwife says, "I'll go get the epidural." She leaves, and like 4 or 5 seconds later, Sam says to the actual nurse or whatever, "Why do I feel like I have to push?" She'd already had a kid. She has a son that's older than my
Mm.
daughter, so she kind of knew. So she's like, "Oh, let me check you," and then she just started jamming that red button, and everyone came running in, and then bam, my kid was out. So that skin to skin, or the bonding, actually was with me, so it'd be even more detrimental, to answer your question.
Sure.
And then back to what I was gonna say is, when people ask, like, took a Uber out to the barbershop this summer, and it came up about the podcast. Told the guy the name of it. He got a kick out of it because he had just retired from 25 years of doing like work like you do, and so he's asking me all these questions, and um, I just kind of was telling him I felt that I had motivating factors. Like I got I did like the unthinkable for it, the lowest of the low. Couldn't even imagine, is like I went in, I stole a rifle from my grandfather and some gold from my grandmother. And it's like, that's just not the type of person that I am at all. So that happened. Um, and that's when I knew, like, this isn't good, whatever. So, all right, got to figure out a plan here. Also came into contact with like what I call a real couple real
Mhm.
cops, the ones that don't wear uniforms. They kind of got to me in the sense of like, what the hell are you doing? Like, you're gonna end up dead, jail,
Yeah.
whatever. Like, actually, one of them is like the one of the first times I've ever seen someone who actually, like I knew for certain believed in me. Um, So, anyways, that goes on. Take a job at a local factory, and then, like, before you know it, find out she's on the way. So, what I mean by motivating factors is I got a kid on the way that did not ask to come into this world. Um, Now I got this guy who's like he didn't do like any favors for me, but he also kind of went to bat for me in the sense of like, this isn't just some junkie. Like this, there's potential with this person. I can see it, type thing, and kind of change some people's minds on things, like the way they viewed me. So don't want to let him down. Don't want to let the kid down. So that's what I mean when I say motivating factors. And I just explained that to that Uber driver, and he looked at me and said, "You understand, like you're like almost like a blessing, right? Like that's not how it goes for most people." And so yeah, I was fortunate there. I was blessed there that I was able to grasp onto those couple things and stay. But would without the medically assisted treatment, I don't believe I would have stood a chance in hell um, of
And
staying.
that's fair.
Yeah.
And so that's part of the reason that, we need to end the stigma around medication assisted therapy. And I think, the problematic infighting, within the community, with harm reduction, right? I think there is a small but vocal faction of even clinicians that are pushing back against harm reduction. They don't believe that it shows fidelity to what addiction treatment is meant to be. And in at least the feedback that I've received from those clinicians is an abstinence only treatment plan is the only treatment plan. Anything else is just sort of playing games. I vociferously disagree. Not just based on my patient to patient contact, but my clinical research also indicates otherwise. So I'm hoping I'm hoping that we will all be able to work together and to be client focused, right? What stage of change is the client in, and what do they want? Because so often, nobody asks the client what they want.
Right.
What are their goals? What are they hoping to get out of treatment? It's very much about telling people what they should be doing. And I just find that really counterintuitive, because therapy in general is collaborative, right? And the client is the expert on themselves, what they're capable of, and how comfortable they feel, you know, not taking anything at all. And, there's nothing wrong with taking Suboxone. I've seen people on it now almost 20 years. And that's the only thing that they do. They may have a check-in with me once a month for some other stuff to see how their life's going and stuff, but really it's the medication that's allowing them to have a life. And quite a lot of them have very fulfilling and very fruitful lives doing nothing other than taking that medication, and that's fine.
Yeah.
And I think we need to back off some of the judgment with that. And I'm also perplexed, I guess, when I see the judgment coming from peers, right? So people with the same diagnosis are kind of looking around and being like, no, despite what clinicians say, I don't think your treatment plan is on par with what it should
Yeah.
be. And in recovery circles, we have quite a few armchair professionals that
Yeah.
think that because their story is this, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then that's gonna be consistent across the board. And I think the most important thing that I've learned in, I guess, my almost a decade of working with this population is that every person is different, and there is no one size fits all treatment plan that's going to be appropriate for everyone. And a treatment plan that was appropriate for somebody a year ago may not be the treatment plan that's still appropriate for them now. So people evolve, they change, their needs change, and I think that their recovery should change with it.
I completely agree. And one of the ones that drives me the most nuts is when I'm on like maybe social media group page
Oh no, social media. You
yeah.
lost me at social media now.
And like so there's I'll never forget the one that sticks out the most was this girl, I forget, um, whatever she put up there. She posts quite a bit about her clean time or whatever, and she was at a ball game, and in the ball game at the ball game, you can see that like there's like beers around. That she's with a group of people. There's beers around them. They're watching the baseball game. She's having a great time, and she just got shredded on there. Like, you're not. That is not. Look at that picture. That's so far from clean. Blah 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 blah. And it's like, you don't. First of all, even if you do know what her substance was that took her out, let's just say that they did, and that it was cocaine or methamphetamines or opiates, whatever.
Mhm.
If she can go to a baseball game or a football game or the Olympics or the ballet or opera and have a glass of wine or a beer or any of that stuff and still be a productive member of society, then there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. Now, not
Right.
everyone
And
can do that, but if there's some that can, then there's some that can. To the people,
there's quite a few people that have a diagnosable substance use disorder, but then after treatment for some time, their disease is in remission, right? So, then they can make different choices. And I hate to say this, but why are we even using the word clean? Are we implying that somebody was dirty when they were using, that they weren't a good person? And I
right?
think so, even the verbiage is so steeped still in this lens of it being a moral failing. And I think we need to really, really kind of put that to bed.
Yeah,
It's not a moral failure. And we need to kind of really move past that line of thinking that I think many people, especially lay people, engage in. And I think that feeds the stigma.
yes.
I also, not a huge fan of the day counting myself
I was
either.
just gonna say that.
I know a lot of people love the day counting. I have to say, in practice, though, I've seen the day counting lead to exacerbating what we call the abstinence violation effect far more than I think the day counting has motivated people.
Yep.
So, I mean, that's another story.
Yeah, I get
But a lot,
blowback.
a lot of people like to count those days. But then, if a lapse happens, which is not um, uncommon with the diagnosis, then man,
Yeah,
what comes with it?
yeah,
The
yeah.
guilt, the shame, the stripping your title of, you know, 395 days in a row sober. I mean, that's a lot of punishment for a lapse. I mean, do we punish type 2 diabetics if they have a cupcake and their blood sugar is, outside of normal limits? I mean, do we shame them in the same way? Do we take all the days of normal blood sugars away from them and, call them a failure? No, we absolutely do not. I don't even think type 2 diabetics count the days of normal sugars. I don't know, maybe some of them do, but
Maybe
I mean,
I
that's
doubt
not
it.
been my experience. So I guess I'm perplexed why we're throwing these systemic barriers at a population that already has a significant number of systemic barriers to overcome.
Yeah, I don't get it either. I know I get a lot of blowback for when people ask me my clean date, and I'm like,
I don't know.
I
No.
couldn't tell you, man. If it was 2014, I know it was around that time, and so then you get some that are like, just don't believe it, just don't, or they don't take it serious, or think I'm making a mockery of it, or like, and it's not the way my brain is geared.
Sure.
I'm a little different, anyways, in the sense of like I've never been one to conform to society like that Michigan hat back there. I talk about it in the first episode because I do a rundown of no paid sponsorships and definitely not affiliated with the Jets, just a fan. But like
I'd hope not.
I,
They're not my favorite team,
I
but
got I got behind the kids at Michigan, we're dealing with all the stuff from the coach. There were whatever he was that was like the sideline stuff, and now you got all these kids that dedicated their whole lives to football and are like having to worry about losing the season and not being qualified, not being able to go on to the playoffs if they get suspended or they get, say they're peg cheating, whatever. And it's like, I've always been the type to like get behind and support that stuff. Well, things like that kind of in society, that's outside their comfort zone, at least up around where I am. And so just
Mm.
little things like that. But the day counting's a big one for me because like yeah, you get to 1,000 days and you mess up and holy moly, you want to talk about setting yourself up for failure. um
And,
that's just
and that's honestly, I feel like almost the sword of Damocles when I see the newer clients, especially in IOP, and they're so very excited about their days, and they'll come into IOP. Today's 61 days, and I'm happy for them. Yeah, they'll get the claps, they'll get the coin, and everything. And for some people, those days are a huge motivating factor, right? But again, it is a chronic relapsing condition. So, like, what is the risk that we're running statistically is using those days, and I equate the day counting as when people, post something on social media and they're constantly like myopically focused on the number of likes they get. It's external validation,
hmm
right? I mean, the day counting is external because you want that coin, you want to tell people, you want to get up in
right.
front of everyone, and you want the applause. And again, you know it's so very important that somebody's recovery is created within them, and then it goes inward and outward instead of outward and inward,
Exactly.
right? Because it's something that they have to create for themselves, and there's quite a bit of trial and error.
hmm
And that's how I prefer to refer to lapses or relapses, as more like trial and error than failures, and that kind of thing. So it's not a failure. I mean, it's a really good learning opportunity, honestly, if we look when people have a lapse or relapse, and hopefully we can confine it to a single lapse event. That's always the hope. But if not, and I welcome people back into my practice, I mean, my question is, well, what did you learn?
Yeah.
Right? Because there's a whole lot that can be learned from the relapse. So instead of guilt, shame, blaming ourselves, telling ourselves that, whatever I was doing wasn't good enough, I wasn't good enough, it was
Right.
somehow my fault. Maybe it wasn't your fault. Maybe you just didn't have the coping skills that you needed to deal with a specific major event. What really was it? And let's take a look at that. And it's never one thing, right?
No. Yeah.
It's never one answer, and each person's different. But I truly wish that we would get to some point where people didn't use words like I failed, or I messed up.
Yeah. That's
You know
not.
Right. And because we never, and I spent in 2020 sometime, a little bit of the time there working in inpatient, psychiatric. And when you would get people readmitted, there was never that stigmatizing verbiage around people who had another manic episode. We never would, never hear people saying, oh, so and so's back again. I guess they failed at their bipolar one. I mean, like, you don't hear that. So I think a lot of that is still this huge rain cloud of addiction is a moral failure. And I do believe that there are people who still honestly believe that addiction is not at all a disease. It is absolutely a moral failure. And when they talk about addicts, what's evoked in their mind is tent city, right? Not
Yeah.
not people, not somebody's mother, not somebody's
Right.
daughter, father, brother, but people who are derelict and not worthy of services. And I think that that's really where we need to talk about empowerment and recovery, because nobody wants to get better when they don't feel good about themselves, right? So really the first step towards recovery is making somebody believe that they're worth putting that kind of effort into their lives.
The one for me is The ironic one for me is that getting back to the insulin stuff. The you like a diabetic needs their insulin every single day to keep their body healthy, blah blah blah. And if they didn't have that insulin, then they would ultimately live a very short life. And nobody shames them for that. Nobody shames them at all. They don't tell them that their genes, their DNA, whatever the case may be, is like this. Just like you should not be part of society. This is blah 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 blah. So I get a kick out of that one. And then
Well, I don't know if you've ever seen My 600-Pound Life, but Dr. Now absolutely does shame his
does
patients.
he?
So I've absolutely seen him shame his patients, and sometimes I think it's for television and it's meant to be funny.
Rob.
Um, but food addiction is a real addiction too, right? And so we are
Yeah.
going to get some crossover, at least with type 2 diabetes and people who have, food addictions.
Yeah, the body
Certainly.
shaming. The body shaming definitely is the thing.
Hmm.
Um, and then I'll say this for, and if any of your people watch, um, so I told you about the one inpatient that led to the outpatient. I managed to work my way through the not having to do A.A.N.A. As soon as I got that wrapped up, had 3 felonies over my head, got it wrapped up, pled out to misdemeanor within uh, probably not even like a day, within hours, probably. We'll say 24 hours just to be safe. Relapsed. And then that relapse is the one that led to me stealing that stuff. Um, and yada, yada, yada. So a relapse is actually what saved, essentially what saved my life, because it wasn't just came right out of that and it was all unicorns and rainbows. It took a relapse
Yeah.
to get there. And then for the failures and all that stuff, I tell my daughter this, and it's how I feel about things. I got 2 rules, and I tell her, if you mess up, I don't care, as long as, and I joke and I say you're yelling bet back, and what I mean by that is you're betting on yourself that you will not make that mistake again.
Yeah.
And the the second rule, the first one I get emotional about because that one that's how I had to do it for me. The second one though is once you make good on that, when you walk through a door, your freaking shoulders better be back, your chin better be up, and you better be turning heads because you're that
Mm.
proud to be there and proud of yourself, because it's not easy, but it is definitely doable. The last thing I like to do is, do you have any hobbies? Like, and like what, like if, I know you talked about like getting away, contributing to the
Mhm.
tourism a little bit the one time, but is there any like actual like reading or like collecting things like
So I love to read. If you see my nightstand, I am typically I have ADHD myself, and it is unmedicated. So it is not uncommon to see half a dozen books on my nightstand that I am reading simultaneously. So there's that. But I love to commune with nature. Um, I was not made to live in an urban society. So in northern Michigan, I was blessed to have some of the most beautiful nature trails there, and the Grand Traverse Bay, also great place to get out, although limited to a few months. One of the most wonderful things about living down here in Bluffton, South Carolina, is we do not have to winterize our boat. I can absolutely get out on the ocean, even
yeah.
if it's with a hoodie
I'm
in
cutting you
January.
off. I'm shutting you off right now.
Okay.
No, I'm joking, but because I get stuck with the cold still, it stings.
Yeah, I know
Yeah,
in
yeah,
northern New York, you're one of those unfortunate souls that must winterize your watercraft. So, I do love getting to the beach when I can. If I can't, if I'm holding back to back sessions, I am blessed enough to have, I would call it waterfront, but it's actually in the back of my office space, so it's water back. But I do like to just sit there and like watch the water and watch the really cool like I guess you would call them, because I live in the low country, they're like swamp birds, but they're these beautiful cranes. And I just find when you see these beautiful cranes and blue herons just kind of like flying around and fishing, it's quite peaceful. I have a canine of my own, so if I do have a long enough break, we'll take a walk. I like to stay active. I like to get out in nature as much as I can, and I'm blessed with this new move to live 9 miles from a gorgeous beach
yeah,
on Hilton Head Island. So I think getting up early some days, if I can do it, although the traffic's been horrendous, I try to get out there sometimes and do sunrise yoga. So I'll do yoga and the sun will come up. There's very few people on the beach. There's a couple of dedicated runners, but aside from that, there's very few people there at sunrise, which is nice. So I really do like getting either on the ocean or in the ocean. And I had never seen actual dolphins before, but they will actually come up to your boat and kind of try and play with you, which I think is amazing. I've always loved wildlife, and I probably felt more connected to wildlife than just humans a lot of the times. And I think that might be because I talk all day,
yeah,
most days.
yeah,
But those are things that I love to do. I'm also picking up. I'm very new at this, so I'm a novice. So I don't want in any way misrepresent my pickleball skills. But I did play varsity tennis, and I was a tennis coach in my younger years. So I'm learning pickleball, and it's actually quite fun. So
yes.
that is something that I also do in my spare time, and I'm hoping to improve at some point, and maybe do some type of league play if time allows.
Um, yeah, no, and it's taken off too, and like you can, there's like groups and leagues, and it's everywhere. So the reason I ask is, I don't tell, obviously once you get to the point of the live guests, they'll be hip to it, but the reason I ask that is because I like to throw a little giveaway in to incentivize the people to comment, to share, to spread the stuff. So
Sure.
I was thinking about Barnes and Noble gift card, and then I was looking at yoga mats, but then when you dropped the pickleball,
Yeah.
that's what we should do. And I'm looking at them now. So that's what we're gonna do. We'll do a well, I'll find one. It'll be a nicer, like probably maybe like I think it's Bravix, Bravixs. You get the two paddles and four balls for like $95. But yeah, we'll get like $100 pickleball set. But the way I do them is once the video reaches 100 comments, then and it could be 200 and 500, whatever. Everybody in the comment section is qualified as long as they have liked the video, commented on it, and then they can either share it like on their social media, um, or they can. I'll put up a thing on Twitter that they can go over to, or X, I guess it is
Yes,
now.
it's X now,
Yeah,
formerly known as Twitter.
yeah, and go over there and confirm that they liked the video and commented on it. So they have the two options. They can share it to their own social media, like it, comment, and the comment it does, and I literally say that the comment can literally say, "I want that pickleball set."
Yeah,
Like,
right.
it's just to get yourself qualified. And then once
Awesome.
we hit 100 comments, um, we'll go through and I'll get it up and we'll do a randomizer and we'll give it away. So, how can everybody get a hold of you?
So it's very simple. You can just go ahead and scan the QR code, and it'll take you to my practice website, and you can get a hold of me right there.
Cool. Well, it was a pleasure talking with you. Um, Super excited, super grateful. Blessed that you decided to come be a guest on the show. And I can't wait to release it. I appreciate all your patience. We've been working on this for a long time. And again, I can't thank you enough.
And
You,
thank you. Thank
yeah,
you. And I hope we can do our part to end stigma and bring this conversation to the forefront in the future.
yeah. At least get the attention, get everyone's attention.
Absolutely.
All righty. You take care. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye. So that was Jordana McHale, and she is a wonderful woman. I am, like I told her, very blessed that she took the time out of her schedule, very busy woman, very smart woman, to come be a guest on the show. I hope y'all were able to learn something. If you are in that area or looking for somebody in that demographic, please reach out to her. I can't speak to how open her schedule is, but I can guarantee you that if she can help you, she will. Um, like she said, scan that QR code, reach out, schedule, however, however you want to go about that, but definitely a good person to have in your corner. With that being said, I would conclude that as we see in with that being said, I would conclude with as we see in everything in our day-to-day lives still, we just don't quite have the proper grasp on this discussion. The positive intent is there. We have the right people coming to the forefront. I say finally. Um, but the reality is, I don't believe that we always have had the right people coming to the forefront. I believe everybody has always wanted to help. I just, again, it's not a knock on them. I just think that with anything in life, there's certain people for certain things, a certain mindset, maybe a certain demographic, a certain culture, a certain whatever, however you want to kind of put that all together. Like, you don't want to have a very, like myself, uneducated tech person trying to run your Fortune 500 software company. It just wouldn't make sense. I wouldn't understand what the engineers were even saying. I wouldn't know what the coders were talking about. So it would not make sense for me to try to then come into a management role in a field like that. So that's all I'm saying there. But if we can keep shining the light on this stuff, keep the right people coming forward, I believe we'll keep making those steps. And I do believe that not only can we come up with a proper diagnosis for all of this or a proper underlining cause, however way you view it, we need to address every stigma that's attached to it. We need to spearhead it. And just like the politicians talk about, y'all know I don't like the politics, but we do. We need, in this aspect of especially because of the fentanyl. We need to take our country back. We need to not have our youth susceptible to that stuff. And unfortunately, the reality is the drugs are always going to be there. So the only way to do that is by knowledge, is by teaching, and by showing. And if we do all those things, the drugs can be there. But if the kids aren't doing them, our society grows to a more positive state. I appreciate everybody for stopping by and staying tuned in. I hope you all have a very happy Thanksgiving for the ones of you who see this when it premieres. For those of you who don't and you see it at a later date, I still hope you are able to grasp a whole ton of knowledge. I hope y'all are blessed. Hope y'all find the peace and love and support that each and every one of you deserve. And for those of you that have that already in your life and in your corner, please don't take it for granted. If nobody's told you this yet today, I love you, and I promise I'm not the only one. Y'all be good.